senior researcher at Human Rights Watch, focusing on the Democratic Republic of Congo. He joins me now live from London. Thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us here on the show. So give us the backstory here. Why was there such disappointment with these peacekeeping soldiers or this peacekeeping missions from the UN?
Well, the departure of MONUSCO has been discussed over the last few years, and although it was decided that the mission should ultimately leave the country, the timeline remained sort of vague. But then a powerful armed group resurfaced a couple of years ago in North Kivu, in the eastern part of Congo, an armed group that is backed by the neighboring country Rwanda, committing war crimes, and that triggered a new humanitarian crisis. And during the rebels' offensive last year, as we saw in the past, there was hostility, there was popular discontent that UN peacekeepers were not stopping or contributing enough to stop the rebels' advance. And so there were violent riots targeting the mission. And remember that last year was an electoral year in Congo. And so the government requested that MONUSCO's exit is, and I quote, accelerated. Now, MONUSCO has disengaged from several parts of the country in recent years and is still operating in 3 provinces, and today marks the start of the withdrawal in one of those 3 last provinces, the province of South Kivu. But the mission will continue to operate in both North Kivu and Ituri, where the situation remains critical. The government says that it wants MONUSCO out completely by the end of the year. But the Security Council has actually yet to commit on such a deadline and says that it will reassess the situation within the next few months.
So will there be any other kind of UN force or troops to replace MONUSCO?
That is not on the agenda, at least for now. And by requesting MONUSCO's departure, the government is basically saying, we don't need you, we can do the job. So MONUSCO is supposed to have a full handover with the Congolese security forces. And this is where question marks remain, because on the one hand, one may argue that the UN sort of failed in civilian protection in Congo. But on the other hand, the Congolese forces are one of the main actors in the violence and the attacks against civilians, particularly in the eastern parts of the country. The army is not a cohesive force, and it's also relied heavily on MONUSCO for logistical support. In the last few years, the government, the Congolese government, signed bilateral agreements with some of the neighboring countries, and so you've got troops from Uganda, from Burundi, also operating in Eastern Congo against some of the armed groups there. And more recently, a regional force from the Southern African Development Community, the SADC, started to deploy. But again, there are questions over the funding of these forces and therefore their capacity to carry out the job effectively. So I think the Security Council will be assessing the situation within the next few months to see whether it can actually leave the remaining 2 provinces where most of the violence is still occurring at the moment.
Thomas Fessy, senior researcher at Human Rights Watch, thank you so much for joining us here on the News Hour.